Pinpoint analysis, a surefire way to get your project approved. Well, joining us to speak about that today is Joe Dunlap, a director at Fortna. Joe, welcome.
Thank you.
Joe, clearly we're beginning to come out of the recession. I guess we perhaps are out of it. People are talking about major projects. Question is, what is a major project and how do you go about getting it approved? What's the trick there?
It's a good question. Thank you for asking. And sure, the economy is improving and people are becoming a little more free with their cash flow, but it's not an endless supply, of course. So they still need to prudently evaluate investments. And what the size of a major investment is relative to the size of the company and its revenue and so forth. But any major investment that requires a business case, it requires the typical investment analysis, return on investment, net present value, internal rate of return, or other metrics that a firm typically looks at to evaluate, to prioritize what has the best return for their dollars to spend.
Are you telling me that there's no better way to do this? I mean, that's the methodology that we're going to follow?
No, not necessarily. What I want to talk about in tipping point analysis is the ability to look at multiple assumptions individually to understand which have the greatest impact on the business case and look at the ones that have the greatest influence, focus on those, and evaluate most probable, worst case, best case, and where the tipping point is in that individual assumption or metric that allows them to have greater confidence in the business case, and then evaluate where if that assumption changes unexpectedly, how did it change the recommendation? Would it have changed the recommendation or the answer that was given to the board requesting for the funding for that project?
Well, that analysis sounds simple enough, but I'm sure there's got to be an awful lot more to it. So walk us through it step by step.
Certainly. Well, first of all, in looking at historical information, collecting data about the company's order profile, SKU profile, history, and customers, demand points, supply points, et cetera, and then looking at forward-looking information. So once you have the historical baseline, collecting from the various stakeholders in the business what the forward-looking projections are, how the business is going to perform over time. If it's a retailer, for example, number of new stores is very important, where those stores are going to be located. New store sales growth, they tend to have a different curve with the new sales when a new store opens versus comp store sales. Various assumptions that project how the business is going to perform and evaluate those on the basis of how the stakeholders foresee the future 3, 5, 10 years out. The further you go out in time, obviously the less likely you are to be accurate and correct, therefore the need to try and create those high and low ranges of probability around each of those metrics.
I know you've worked with any number of clients. I hope that there is an example that you can give us where this type of analysis was applied, and walk us through that, if you would, as specifically as you can, explaining to us, what the desires were of the client, the concerns were, and those details that you had to bring to their attention that perhaps they were simply not aware of before.
Sure. A project not too long ago, very recently, with a regional retailer. They were experiencing some significant growth, had launched a new e-com website, and were experiencing some capacity issues in an existing 2DC network. So the concern was that they were going to exceed capacity in the very near term. So going through that process of evaluating all of the existing historical data and looking forward, meeting with the buyers in particular about how they were going to buy product in the future, where were the sources of demand, sources of supply, what countries were they sourcing from, were there going to be any shifts in those sources, were they going to be using different ports, were they going to see increase in volume in specific product categories, more so than in others, and what did that aggregate forecast look like? As we reviewed that forecasted information, it said that they needed a new distribution center by 2015, which was a $20, $30, $40 million investment, regardless of putting the business case together. So the question was, how do we defer that? How do we evaluate the need for a distribution center and then potentially be able to delay that by some number of years, saving some depreciation cost as well? So we looked at other metrics as well to determine how could we improve capacity without having to make significant investments, expanding an existing facility, and so forth. And we found that one particular product category of this supplier allowed us to change the turn rate. The buyers just changed the behavior, the frequency, the cadence in which they were ordering supply, allowing for more frequent turns in that product category and alleviating the biggest capacity constraint, postponing the distribution center by a number of years.
And they took that to their board, presumably, and the board approved that. Is that right?
Exactly right. They approved the working with the buyers to determine was that a feasible alternative. They approved that without a significant investment, delaying the capital outlay for the new facility. And ironically, I'm being asked to go back and help reevaluate the need for that third facility location and put the business case together for that spend.
Final question then, Joe. For those who weren't taking notes, can you give us a kind of a laundry list then of the major points in this analysis that you're talking about here? Things that need to be looked at and considered when one is contemplating a major project and how it's going to be approved.
I think the points to evaluate and looking at developing a business case for a major significant project include looking at not just the static assumptions. The biggest failure in business cases going to the board is walking in with a static set of assumptions. This is what the business told us. And walking in to assume that this is what is going to happen to the business and therefore this is our recommendation. When the board tends to ask the tough questions about what if, what if, what if, what if. So if you evaluate the variability in those assumptions, again, a worst case, a best case, or just metering between those individual assumptions one at a time until you see a tipping point, the answer changes, our recommendation changes. Then you see that you've considered a full set of assumptions and developed a full business case that gets better support from the board.
What I'm hearing is that you've got to have flexibility if you hope to have your project approved.
Absolutely.
Joe, thank you so much for meeting with us today.
Thank you.
That's Joe Dunlap, Fortna. He's speaking with us today about a tipping point analysis, a surefire way of getting your project approved. Thanks for watching.